Okay. Yeah, a domed pad would probably be better, because I think I am getting some resistance from the pad, even though sometimes the pad lends support, but this material is weak, right? So it's not going to power through those areas with too much support. If it's got too much support, it's not going to be able to force its way through because it's just too weak. A lot of you guys are challenged by these islands, so I think this would be a good time to show you what I do. Try first to take them away with pressure. If not, a couple more percussion strikes and we should be good. Take away the islands. Now, is this good enough? Is this thickness good enough for hunting? It's probably good enough. If you've got a piece of river cane or something with a thick enough tip, like if you use a fat end on this will probably work. But we're going to go thinner. See if I can. I've got a thin arrowhead here. You can see there's quite a bit of difference. Now, how did they used to do it back in the day? Am I using a technique that they used back in the day? Oh, I don't know. Probably not really. I say that because a lot of these are flattened on one side. You can see that it's an obvious technique where they flatten one side and they try to flatten the other, and if it doesn't get flat, it's okay. That's one technique. Just flatten one side. You can usually get one side pretty flat and then do the best you can on the other side, and with pressure, okay? Another pressure technique is to concentrate pressure flaking on one side only. Get good at pressure flaking in one direction and on one side only. Flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other side. And what you get, sometimes you get a twist in the blade, and sometimes you get straight blades, but you get them dished out, or what's called a hollow ground effect. You know what I'm saying? So if I were to just focus on pressure flaking in this direction on this side only, and then flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other, I would get two dished out areas, one on this side and one on the other, right? And when you look at it from the front, you'll see that the blade will be curved or twisted, right? That's another way. Another way that they used to do it back in the day was with long ribbon flakes on both sides, with a pattern flake, with a flake pattern, like the collateral flaking or parallel oblique or something that had a pattern to it. So they would just basically take very shallow flakes and go as far across as possible with each flake and thin it down that way. You'd lose some width, right, with each pass, but you try to work with platforms and with edges as small as possible. so that you don't lose too much off the edge. Those are 3 techniques: the pattern flaking, the flatten one side, leave one side domed, and the alternate scoop outs. Those are 3 that I've seen on artifacts. 3 techniques I've seen on artifacts. I guess the fourth technique is the random spaz technique that I use. Okay, so when I'm at this stage, I'm just going to hit a couple more times with percussion. Sorry, but I can't resist. I don't have a big long EC stick, so I can do this with a long EC stick. To get rid of that island, I just don't have one. Let's see. Yeah, I gotta make one. So maybe on the next video I'll have one ready. Yeah, I can probably do that with an EC stick, a long one. Okay. So yeah. All right. So I cheated a little bit, but I think you get the idea. Oops. I lost my pad here. Okay. So yeah, just selecting strategic areas to hit with percussion, and it works pretty good to thin it down. It's still not as thin as the other one I showed, obviously, but we're getting a lot thinner. Okay. I don't care about those little steps. It's basically the final heavy pressure pass. Everything else is light pressure from here. After I do these relatively large flakes to smoothen out the surface. I'm not looking through the viewfinder. Hopefully you can see that. Just taking opportunistic flakes. To even things out and to try to get the final flake pattern. It's not going to be fancy or anything. I wasn't paying attention on that flake. It's an easy mistake to make once you get to the end, to stop paying attention and then get some unnecessary step fracturing. Getting a little nervous because I could snap this. I don't want to break this on the video. It's getting to the point where it's thin enough to snap in half. So I've done most of the pressure flaking with this tool here. It was not optimal, but it did work. I'm going to switch over to a smaller tool now. This one here. And see how it goes. To do the final flaking. I was having trouble yesterday with this particular flaker. I wasn't able to see through the viewfinder what I was doing. Okay, let's see. Yeah, that's okay. Now I'm using mostly aggressive pressure, what I call aggressive pressure in this video, which means I'm controlling when it snaps off. Passive pressure is you put your flaker on the surface and you press and press and press. You don't know when it's going to release. You just let it release on its own. That's passive pressure. Sometimes you can get longer flakes with passive than you can with aggressive. Well, I shouldn't say sometimes. That's probably most times you can get longer flakes with passive. But again, that takes longer. I'm going to try some passive here. I just press until I get a release. I'm not even paying attention to when it releases. It's, you know, it'll surprise you every time. It's not like a big surprise, but you know what I mean. And you can get to the point where you can get used to it releasing on its own. And you don't have to think about, wait, we just let it release on its own. You don't have to have that in your mind. You can just snap that way instinctively after a while. And get longer flakes that way. But some guys just aggressively flake and they're fine too. So that's a passive. That was a passive flake. These are all passive now. And you can see it does give you a good long flake in many cases. That was kind of a aggressive flake. That one too. Just because the platform wasn't the best. You got to have a solid platform or a solid seat to do the passive. Took a little bit too much off the edge on that one. Sometimes that happens when you have too strong of a platform. I should be thinking more about pushing these flakes in a little bit further. Maybe I shouldn't have switched to such a small tip so soon. But you can get flakes to travel pretty good even with a small tip. That one traveled pretty good. So I think you can tell when I'm doing an aggressive flake or a passive flake. And kind of figure out what I'm doing. There's really no exact reasons why I'm doing either one. I just, whichever seems to be better. If I have a good platform I'll do the passive flake. If not, I'll just snap one off easily or as quick as I can. See how it works. But if I have to get a long one, I'll do a passive pressure. I'm trying to follow this ridge here. That was pretty good. That one was passive, but it didn't go very far. So you can get short flakes, obviously, with any technique. Short flakes by accident. But if you have a good seat and you're patient and you push inward, but not too inward, a lot of times you can get good results. With the passive pressure. All right, so it's important to thin down the center, the center area. So I took a big flake here. I'll try to do the same thing on the other side. Now it's good to use a small tool on the base like this because you can snap it in half at this point. If you're using a tool that's way too large and you're snapping off flakes on the base, or you're driving flakes, it's really easy to snap the whole thing in half when you're doing this with a larger flaker. So if you try to use the smallest flaker you can for this operation. And if you're finding you can't drive flakes very far, then you can break out the larger flaker. But the smaller flaker seems to be working pretty good. Okay, so I think that's good enough before I actually start shaping everything else. Maybe put some notches in it. I'm going to take down this edge a little bit more and see if I can run flakes into this fat area. It is hard to hold at this stage. And you can see I am getting some rocking. There is some rocking of the point, but I can still drive flakes. I just got to be careful. I have to be conscious of, following wherever it starts to rock. I've got to kind of adjust my position on my flaker to stay in a good position. It would be optimal if it didn't rock at all, because then I'd be able to push flakes a little bit inward better and they would travel further. But again, everyone has trouble with this at this stage. I guess some guys have stronger fingers and are able to prevent this rocking. That's what you want to try to do. You want to try to hold it as well as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can get a relatively thin point. Not too bad. Let's see. Yeah, not too bad. That's about an inch wide, I would say. And to finish off, you just kind of peck at it. You can put little serrations into the edge if you want. I tend to not use too many serrations, although I have tried in the past to get good at these little serrations. If you're replicating a point with serrations, then do it, but otherwise you don't need them. There are tests that have shown that serrated points really don't penetrate much deeper, if any, than regular straight-edged points. And this is all just aggressive pressure flaking. I'm not doing any passive long flakes at this stage. Just listening for the snap. I don't want any scrunching or crushing. Every flake at the last stage should be a snap, unless you're not trying to snap off a point. Snap off a flake. If you're just scrunching it to get rid of the edge, then yeah, that's fine. Like right there, I'm just scrunching to get rid of this, taking it back so I can flip it over and take some flakes off of this top side. Maybe doing some shaping. I saw a thick spot there. But for the final flaking, you want little snaps. You don't want any scrunching or crushing. And it doesn't have to be serrated like this with little serrations. You can use a wider tip like this. Snap off flakes with a wider tip to give you more of a smooth edge. But I like how this little flaker is doing, so I'm just going to continue with it. The danger of this is don't do what I'm doing. I'm forgetting that I can develop these little step fractures by doing that, by being too adventurous with the flaking, trying to drive in too far instead of just pecking the edge. You end up with step fractures. I forgot about that part. So I'm trying to thin down some thick spots. I don't have much time left. Let's see. I might be able to get those step fractures from the other side. Might be able to take those off. If I run a nice long thinning flake, like a ribbon flake, across here and into there, I could probably remove that little mistake there. If I'm lucky, I can run a flake all the way across like that, or most of the way anyway, without overshooting. Passive pressure. Didn't go all the way, went halfway. Let's try another one right beside it. Well, move down a little further. Yeah, I moved down a little further and then took a flake from almost the exact opposite side, and it did clear out some of that. Okay. Now back to where I was. Let's see. Yeah. I think I took back this edge, downward so I could flip it and attack this high spot right there. Nice. That one fanned out a lot, which is kind of good at this stage because I don't want it to overshoot. I'd rather have it fan out. I think that's good enough. I could probably take one more pressure flake into that area, but I'm just going to leave it. Could take one from the base, or more than one. I could take some, make this a little bit more concave and take another one from the base. Take a flake from here up into that area, or take a couple flakes. All right, let's see how it goes. Almost. Again, if it was a little bit stronger material, it might have gone, but since it's a fragile material, it can't plow through on the very edge. It'll try to feather out or step or hinge or something before it gets to the tough area. And the same thing happens with obsidian. Why don't I use a bigger flaker? I could, but I'm afraid to snap the whole point. Yeah, a little bit too adventurous there. and I used an aggressive pressure flake, so it was too much downward pressure, not enough inward pressure. I might have been able to do it. But we're at 30 minutes. I'm going to pause it here and continue in the next video.